Then I'm going to teach you all about percent proportions and equations. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to use proportions to solve percent problems. So go ahead and get out your binder, turn to the math section, and get ready to take some notes. So as we know, percentages are used frequently in real life and can be solved two ways. We already know that we can take a fraction like 1/2, make it a decimal by dividing. 1 divided by 2 gives us 0.5. And then we should know that making a decimal up into a percent, you put your finger or your pen on the decimal and move it over to the right 2 times, and then fill in that blank with the placeholder 0. So that's how we know that 1/2 is the same thing as 0.5 is the same thing as 50%. We can also set up a percent proportion using this new formula. This formula is listed here, but right now it looks kind of confusing, so let's go ahead and look at it with an example. Question 1 says the 7th grade class held an end of the year dance. Of the 300 7th graders, 246 decided to attend. What percent of the 7th grade class attended the end of the year dance? So we know already how to solve this question. We could do 246 divided by 300, make it a decimal, and then move that decimal point over 2 times. But let's say we needed another way to do this. There is a different way to do this using what we already know about proportions. So we know that 246 out of the 300 7th graders went to this dance. We would write that as a proportion or a ratio. There's 246 that attend out of the 300 total. Here's where the proportion part comes into this. So when we set up proportions before, this was the information that we had, and we would set up an equals and a new fraction. This is how we set up proportions before. Since the question is asking what percent of the 7th grade class attended, we should know now that percent means out of 100. Percent literally means out of 100. So our new fraction needs to be a percentage out of 100. We are solving for that missing percent value. So we have a percent proportion problem set up already. This is the exact same way that we would solve proportions, except now it's just going to be out of 100 every time. When we're solving for a percent, it's going to be out of 100. So just like we solved before, we would take the two numbers we have across from each other, and we would cross multiply. So if I have these two numbers across from each other, I multiply 246 times 100, and then divide by the number that's left. 246 times 100 is 24,600 divided by the number that's not circled. That's the 300. So that number, 24,600 divided by 300 equals 82. What I really just did was solved an equation. So when I solve a proportion problem with percentages, I'm going to set up the proportion using the information I have in the problem, or this formula, however you want to think about it, and plug the given values into the equation. So this is now an equation. Multiplying across and dividing by what's left is how we solve for x. So we've just solved an equation using proportions and percent. If you feel confident with this, you can try number 2, but I'm going to go ahead and walk it through with you step by step. So number 2 says a farmer decides to sell 32 pounds of his small 96-pound potato crop. What percent of the crop did he sell? So let's start with what we know. We know we have a part out of a whole, just like here in this formula. We have 32 pounds out of the 96. So we can write that ratio below. 32 out of 96. Normally we would label, but since they're the same units, I'm just not going to for this one. We also know that we need this to equal a new fraction because this is a proportional relationship. And it's going to be out of 100 because percent means out of 100. And I'm solving for the percent of the crop that he sold. When I have my equation set up like this, I'm solving for the missing number. Anytime I'm solving for a missing number, I'm solving an equation. The way to solve this equation is to cross multiply. So I take the two numbers that I have across from each other, the 32 and the 100, I circle them, and I multiply them. So 32 times 100 is 3,200. And then I divide by the number that's left. I divide by the number that's not circled. So 3,200 divided by 96. That gives me 33.3 repeating. So approximately, x would equal 33.3%, approximately. Feel confident about those two, you can try the next one by yourself. Pause the video now, try it all by yourself, then press play when you're ready to check. Otherwise, I'm just going to walk through number 3 for you right now. So it says on an average Saturday, 15% of the tickets sold are child tickets. If there were 460 tickets sold on Saturday, how many were sold to children? So we're given some information that's a little bit different this time. This time we're given the percent and we're solving for how many children's tickets were sold. I'm given the percent, 15%. I'm given the 15 out of 100 ratio already. So I'm not given, in like the other ones, I'm not given the part to the whole. I'm given the percent out of 100. I'm given 15%. This is going to equal a number out of 460. I'd used 460 because it says 460 tickets total were sold. I'm solving for how many children's tickets were sold. So that's the missing number. So this is a proportion, and I solve any proportion by cross multiplying. So I take the two numbers across from each other, I multiply them out, and then I divide by the number that's left. So 460 times 15 is 6,900, and I divide that by 100. So my answer would be 69. And you should always be thinking to yourself, 69 what? What is this? What did I just find? Is that a percentage? No. In this case, the question was asking how many children's tickets were sold. So this would be 69 child tickets. So that one looks a little bit different, but these are really the only kind of problems that you're going to see. Either problems like this one or this one. So let's look at number 4 all by yourself. I want you to try number 4 completely by yourself, trying to decide, am I doing it this way? Am I doing it this way? And I want you to make sure that you try it all by yourself. Press play whenever you're ready to check. Okay, so you should have just tried this. The question says the campus demographics include 480 female students. This represents 64% of the student body. How many students are enrolled in total? So what I'm given here is I'm given the percent. So I'm going to give 64 out of 100 already. I'm already going to write that down because I'm given the percent. I'm given the female student population. So I'm given 480 females out of an unknown total. I know that I'm going to choose the variable here instead of an actual number because the question is asking how many students are enrolled total. So since that's the question or the unknown, I'm going to use just a variable x to denote that this is an unknown part of the equation. Then I'm going to solve by cross multiplying. So the two numbers I have across from each other are 100 and 480. I always circle them, and then I multiply those out. I get 48,000, and I divide by the number that's left, 64. So my final answer is x equals 750 total students. Got that problem right. Give yourself a pat on the back. If you didn't, that's okay because number 5 is very, very similar. Trisha made a 56% on her science test. If she got 14 problems correct, how many questions were on the test? So again, I'm looking for a total. So go ahead and see if you can set up the percent equation for this problem. Pause the video now and then press play when you're ready to check. Okay, so let's look at what we know for this problem. We know she got a 56%, and percent means out of 100. So I'm going to write this as 56 out of 100. I know this is going to equal a new proportion. I don't know the total number of questions, but I know that she got 14 correct. So I'm going to write 14 correct out of an unknown total. So I'm going to write an X. You can write a question mark. You can leave it blank, whatever you need to do. This is the unknown because I'm being asked how many questions were on the test. How many in total are there? So no matter what, this is the unknown number underneath of that 14. When I solve a proportions problem, I always multiply across from each other. So I'm going to cross multiply, and I'm going to divide by the number that's left. It's the same process every time. So I get 1,400 divided by 56 and end up with 25. So my x in this equation would equal 25, and it was asking how many questions. So my answer is questions. There are 25 questions on the test. And if you take a step back and think about it, it makes sense. She failed her science test. She got a 56%. If we know that 50% is half, we should know that she got a little more than half right. So half of 25 is 12.5, and 14 is a little more than half. So that makes sense with the 56% that we were given in the problem. So now we're going to continue practicing what we just learned, but now we're going to be able to use tables to organize the information. So it says, use your understanding of percentages to answer the questions below. It says, Jed owns a music store and is taking inventory, which means that he's just taking into stock what he has of each instrument for a new order. He has organized the count of instruments in the table below. Help Jed analyze his store and place an upcoming order. So part A says, find the percent of the store that each category of instruments compromises. That's like a big, long, fancy way of saying how much of each thing is there as a percent. So before we do anything else, the first thing we need to do is find the total amount of instruments he has in the store. So take a second and add up all of these instruments. There are 500 instruments in total. After adding up all these instruments, I got 500 total. So now that you learned this new way to do this, you could do it the new way. You could also write, I know that there are 65 string instruments. So there are 65 out of the 500 total. That line means divide. 65 out of 500 gives you 0.13. 0.13 as a decimal is 0.13. And then you take your finger or your pencil, put it on the decimal, move it 2 places to the right. It's the same thing as 13%. If you don't remember it that way or don't want to do it that way, you can write this as a percent proportion equation. So you could write 65 out of the 500 equals a percentage out of 100, because percent means out of 100. You cross multiply and solve for x. When you do that, that's another way to get 13. I personally would go for the 65 out of 500, make it a decimal, then make it a percent. That to me is the easiest way, especially if you have a calculator, which you most of the time will in your daily life. So I would take 65 divided by 500, take the decimal, move it over 2 times so you get 13%. If you don't understand how to do that, then go back to your notes on this and you can do it just like we were doing on these problems. Whichever way you do it, I'm going to go ahead and give you a second to see if you can figure out by yourself the percussion instruments, wind instruments, and brass instruments percentage of the total. So go ahead and do that now. Here's what I got for each one. So percussion is 18%, wind instruments 31.8%, brass instruments 37.2%. So part B says, based on previous sales, Jed determines that he would like to order 30% more percussion instruments. How many percussion instruments should Jed order? I'll give you a second to think about this problem. This one's worded a little different, so this one's worded kind of weird, but it's the same process as we were doing with percentages. He wants 30% more percussion instruments. There's 90 percussion instruments. So you're going to take 30% of the 90. You want to know 30% of 90. Let's think about what these words mean. 30% means 30 out of 100 or 0.3. They're the same number. Of means times, and then 90 is a 90. So you can do 0.3 times 90, or you can look at it the way we were doing it before. This is how I would do it, and I end up with 27. He needs 27 more percussion instruments. So 27 more means adds. He would add 27 onto the 90. I would solve part B when it asks about 30% more of a problem. You take 30% of it. You take the percent of the number, which means multiply, and then since it says more, you would add that onto it. So we can do 27 plus 90, and we can end up with our new total of 117. So you would have 117 in total. That's in total, but since the question asked how many should he order, the answer would just be 27. So it's like a multi-step problem using percentages. You can do it multiple different ways. Let's go and look at C. Since after the order arrives, Jed has a total of 130 string instruments. So he's ordered some more instruments. Now he has a total of 130 string. What percentage of his string instruments are new? So he had 65 old ones. He's got new ones. We don't know how many new ones he has. That'll be the first thing we figure out. So 130 minus 65 gives me 65. So he has 65 new and 65 old. You should know now that he has 50% new instruments. So since it was 65 out of 130, and that is half of 130, he has 50% new instruments. Let's look at one more percent problem, except this time it's in a table and you're given the percent. So it says Southbrook Middle School tabulates the number of students who participate in the school athletic program. They have displayed the percentage of students who participate in the table below. Sorry about my spelling of participate. It says if Southbrook Middle School has 850 students in total, then how many students participate in the various number of sports? So the way that I would do this is to take 12% of the 850 to find out how many don't participate. 12% of 850 means 12% times 850. It would be 102 students. Do the same thing for each one of these. Take the percent times the total to figure out the number of kids who do only one sport, two sports, or three or more sports. If you don't want to do it as a percent, you can always do it as a decimal by taking the decimal and moving it back over 2 times to the left. So take a second and fill out the rest of this table and then press play when you're ready to check. Okay, so you should have tried this by yourself. The only one sport kids is 42% times 850, so 357. Same process for 2 sports, 238. And then the 3 or more sports is 153. All right, guys, that's it. If you made it to the end of this video, please put your favorite instrument in the comments. Today we went over percent proportions and equations. So now you should be able to use proportions to solve percent problems, but you should also be able to realize that a percent is the same thing as a fraction. If you can write it as a fraction, you can write it as a decimal, you can write it as a percent. There's multiple different ways to solve these percent problems. So now you should go back to the calendar and complete any other assignments you have left for the day. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.